Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Bex Peterson, and today I'll be discussing the findings of my research paper, Countering Q. Before we start, I do want to give a brief content warning. There will be some mentions of child abuse, child trafficking, and general discussions of racism and bigotry. When I was conducting the research for this paper last fall, I found myself struggling to explain QAnon to folks who aren't terminally online. Not just what it is, but why it's so critical to understanding the future of extremist violence and radicalization. But then the election happened, so for a while I would just point to headlines like, "This is QAnon," and "This is also QAnon." Now, after January 6th, I can also tell you that this is QAnon, and of course, this is actually the QAnon shaman. If you couldn't tell by his energy, he's more of a QAnon mascot than a figurehead. Over the past 4 years, the QAnon movement has exploded from a halfways ironic collection of anonymous conspiracy LARPers to a global big tent conspiracy phenomenon. QAnon has international reach, political influence, and a body count. And it all started online. So this brings us to today's big question. What should we do about QAnon? So, on a hunt for answers, I spent last fall surveying conversations taking place on 2 subreddits. QAnon Casualties, a community established for people who have loved ones in the QAnon movement, and the sister subreddit Recovery, a growing support group for ex-QAnon members. I compared these conversations against the methodology used to deplatform ISIS on Twitter in the early to mid-2010s, as digital radicalization and de-radicalization is a fairly new field with very few success stories. So, alright, what exactly is QAnon? In 2017, an anonymous poster on the image board 4chan claimed to be a high-ranking member of the Trump administration, signing off their cryptic missives as QAnon, though most people just call the guy Q. Q-drops, as the post would come to be called, were essentially word salads of scrambled dog whistles that users were encouraged to decode for meaning, which boosted engagement, subsequently boosting Q. The posts roped in other far-right conspiracies circling at the time, like claims of a deep state liberal shadow government, cryptic warnings about mainstream media brainwashing, and of course everything that spiraled out of the Jeffrey Epstein scandal. Then COVID-19 happened and everything got worse. Not every anti-masker is a QAnon follower, but most QAnon followers are anti-maskers. Because anyone can read anything into QAnon, talking points and dog whistles can crop up in all kinds of internet communities. This means we wind up with a lot of digital roads leading to QAnon. For example, a particularly effective radicalization effort occurred last year in the form of the #SaveTheChildren movement. This was a series of QAnon-organized protests that occurred worldwide under the guise of raising awareness about child trafficking. Because the QAnon-savvy organizers purposefully buried any mention of the conspiracy movement to focus instead on a vague anti-human trafficking stance, something most people would agree with, these protests were unwittingly supported by people with no idea that they were promoting QAnon talking points. It's a shorter digital path than you would think to start from #SaveTheChildren on Twitter to having Clinton-related conspiracy theories about Jeffrey Epstein show up in your recommendations, leading you to online spaces where people will swear there's proof of child trafficking tunnels under Washington if you know where to look. So, at this point you might be thinking there's an obvious solution to all this. And, well, yes, we can kick people off of Twitter, and we should do that. But believe it or not, beyond the difficulty of pinning down online extremists when they hide behind code words and jargon, there are downsides to employing the so-called ban hammer as your only counter tactic. As a quick case study, we can look at the life and times of QAnon faith healer Praying Medic, who finally lost his platform on Twitter after the January 6th insurrection. Given that Praying Medic was preaching QAnon to an audience of over 400,000 followers, banning him was absolutely the right move. However, Praying Medic had already been prepping QAnon followers for his inevitable deplatforming for months by urging them to leave mainstream social media sites and join his own private streaming service. This really echoes the fears of folks on the ex-QAnon subreddits that once their loved ones leave the mainstream social media spheres for more insular and radicalizing communities, they'll no longer be able to reach them. Even one of the ISIS studies cautioned against using unilateral bans for the exact same reason. The thing about radicalization online is that often it's not about tactics and manipulation on the part of extremist movements to pull people in one at a time. What we're looking at instead is the ways in which extremist movements create radicalizing environments. So, online spheres where misinformation and propaganda is mixed in alongside truth to an extent where it's almost impossible to tell up from down. The only thing that will fix this is a holistic approach that prioritizes developing a digital environment that is unfriendly to radicalization efforts. So, here's my list of recommendations. Starting with the first, we should absolutely deplatform extremist influencers wherever we can. Taking Donald Trump off Twitter alongside other major QAnon promoters has totally helped to lower the political temperature online. But we should also be funding researchers, reporters, and online radicalization experts. A lot of this work is being done by passionate independents who understand how internet movements form and spread. The Canadian Anti-Hate Network is an exceptional example of this kind of activism, as they not only archive extremist activity online, but actively investigate and unmask radicalizing influencers. And of course, the effectiveness of social media content moderation really depends on the site's willingness to financially prioritize moderators as skilled laborers, instead of contracting out to underpaid gig workers and financially coercing them to prioritize speed above all else. For the average social media user, you can absolutely do your part by flagging or reporting hateful and radicalizing content when you see it, promoting counter-messaging and fact-checking with likes and shares, and above all, if you see something that you think could be spreading misinformation or hateful propaganda, please do not engage with it. Every time you quote retweet someone's bad take, you're boosting its visibility in the algorithm. If you do want to address it on your own platform, just screen cap it and share that instead. If you read through the testimonies on QAnon casualties and recovery, there are just far too many accounts from child abuse and trafficking victims, some who are still just teenagers, who got sucked into QAnon through the hashtag Save the Children movement and are now struggling to recover from the subsequent trauma and brainwashing they endured. I think it's kind of easy to imagine these people as, entirely bigoted, hateful, or just entirely ridiculous. But individuals aside, at the end of the day, there are just no winners in a scenario where we fail to address the phenomenon of online radicalization, and far too many victims to ignore. QAnon isn't the first extremist movement to start online. We can look at incels, we can look at Proud Boys, a lot of the far-right movements. If we don't start taking serious steps to dismantle the system that enabled the spread of movements like this, we know QAnon won't be the last. Thank you so much for your time, and I'm really happy to answer any questions you might have.